Welcome again to another episode of Security Unwired, where we address tech with intent and peace with purpose. Today is quite a special episode because it's with Caterina Rodelli, a EU policy analyst at Access Now, and she also co-leads the Protect Not Surveil coalition, an amazing coalition that groups both digital rights and migrants' rights, an intersection that I think we need to be talking more about, which is why we're here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be part of this program.
Basically, for Security Unwired, we have been addressing a lot of intersections of technology and AI and security, but it's also important to go beyond what is the concept of security, right? And I think security has been overly used at some point in context nowadays. And this is the case with migration. And particularly for the EU, there's huge migration flows from Mediterranean and other regions such as Eastern Europe and the Balkans. But the peak was in the year 2023 with over 300,000 of migration flows from both of these regions. And I think that dealing with migration is beyond just a security approach, as we hear. And and we're in a very digitally driven era, and sometimes technologically dependent era where we cannot do any operations without technology, but we have to also make sure that it's safe and ethical and responsible, which is why I want to see from a point of view of an EU policy analyst such as yourself, how can we as actors visualize technology used in migration contexts, and what can we do about it? First thing I want to really go deep into is, if you had to pick specific cases from all of the experience that you've had so far, cases of mass surveillance and dual use of technology in migration contexts, what are like the cases that really stood out for you in both of these regions for migration flows towards your EU?
Yes, it's a hard question because there are thousands of applications of surveillance technology in the migration context. So if you ask me to pick three, I think it's good to pick three examples that represent the political context in which surveillance technology is applied in migration and how it stems from a warmongering position. So there is a marriage between military security and migration approach. So what I'm thinking of, the most blatant examples is, for example, aerial surveillance that is deployed at the borders. For example, I'm thinking of the Mediterranean, the central Mediterranean, so the strip of sea between Tunisia, Libya, and the Italian coast. Also thinking of Greece and at the borders with Turkey, but also Poland and Belarus. There is a vast deployment of area surveillance of all forms, especially drones related. And what we are seeing now, especially at the Greek-Turkish context, is a deployment of area surveillance that is equipped with softwares that allows for detection of objects and humans, that would render, therefore, easier the detection of people that are crossing borders, and therefore the information would be shared with central operation control room that then would inform border guards where to go to push people back. And I think the aerial surveillance case is very interesting because it shows you how European border forces are more focusing on air rather than sea. And that means that they focus more on pushbacks rather than saving. Because if you are at sea, you are forced into acting and caring, supposedly. But if you're focusing on the air, on what kind of information you can get from the sky, that means that you can wash your hands and just inform who is the point of contact to conduct pushbacks. So this is one dimension where I would focus of like how surveillance technology is deployed in the migration context. The other one is a very vast one that has to do with data collection. For any person that does not hold a European citizenship and has ever had a contact with the European Union for a visa or whatever, you know that you are asked to provide tons of information about yourself, including biometric information, for whatever reason. This information has been asked for like many years now, and if you put this where does it go? It goes into like large-scale databases. We have different ones with different names, with different purposes. If you are applying for a visa, we'll go to VIS. If you're applying for asylum, we'll go to Eurodac. The point is that people with a migrant background with no European citizenship will have lots of their personal data and biometric data stored in these databases. Now, we are now into a political context where the European Union is strong on the agenda, the idea of deporting anyone that does not hold the right to stay in the European Union, where this right is really like politically defined. Exactly. And what we are seeing now is that the next step of the use of this vast amount of data that has been collected will take a very dystopian course, because we are seeing lots of investment into national police forces, into biometric mobile devices, meaning devices that look like our mobile phones, smartphones, that have the capacity to scan fingerprints or faces and check the information that is collected against the databases.
So cross-checking
Which means that if your residence permit is expired and this information is flagged into the database, a police person that will conduct probably racial profiling against you will have the opportunity to stop, conduct racial profiling, and also see what is the status of your migration.
And at some point, even asylum-seeking processes that take so long that at some point the temporary residence expires.
Exactly. The reality is that people that have to undergo these procedures is like, it's one of the most horrible experiences forms of bureaucratic violence that the European Union impose on people. And we are seeing this already also in the US with the ICE. ICE is already not only killing its own people in the street, but is also terrorizing people by stopping them and identifying them with this type of application. So that's what we can expect in the next form of data collection, biometric surveillance, plus the deportation obsession that the European Union has. So this is one other dimension. And then the last dimension I was thinking of is the one about surveillance of not mobility, but also solidarity, how surveillance tech plays into this other security war agenda that European governments have against migrants, but also their own people. And one of the sadly famous cases that we had this last year was the use by the Italian government of spyware against refugees, but also people active in the search and rescue community, especially the NGO Mediterranean, as well as journalists that were covering migration routes in the Mediterranean. And what we need to observe about the use of spyware, so therefore like a malware in your phone that scans the information, your personal, your private chats, is that working in solidarity with migrants has been classified as a national security risk by Italian authorities, which had provided them with the legitimization of the use of such an intrusive practice.
Yeah.
We see this with spyware, but we have seen this also in other contexts. In Italy, in Greece, with European agencies, especially Frontex, which is the European agency for border guards, and Europol, which is the European police agency, that because of this political agenda and priority of cracking down smuggling, which has become the second priority after deportation, is cracking down smuggling networks. What we have seen in the past years is that these two agencies have driven new programs that are about collecting data from people as soon as they disembark. So as soon as these arrive on the Italian or the Greek shores, people that they suspect being involved into migrant smuggling networks.
And that's the thing. So suspect is a very big word. And what are the criteria that we use? And this actually is kind of a follow-up on what you just said about the potential or possibility of racial profiling just to have a suspect for security purposes.
But this is all migration policies are based on. It's a suspicion of the other. And then we could go into sociological conversations. But the basis on which this regime, surveillance regime, is based on is anecdotal and is racist. And what does this mean in practice? It means in practice that there was this program called Pedra, which was run by Frontex and Europol, which gave these two agencies the mandate of collecting data from people suspected to be involved into migrant smuggling. And this included migrant people themselves, but also NGOs and people involved in solidarity and search and rescue activities. Frontex would collect the data and then share it with Europol, which, being the police agency, would apply a criminal justice approach to how this data is used. So this is another dimension of how surveillance tech is used into the migration context.
And, well, potentially abused for beyond just migration reasons.
Yes, exactly. I mean, for sure abused in the migration context, and for sure with the perspective of then
Policing.
being used against whoever is considered a suspect or a
Or
suspicion
threat.
in our society.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned how strategic the use of technology has become, and sometimes serves more than just quote security purposes, starting with the aerial surveillance to avoid land and sea exposure and accountability, obviously. And you've mentioned Eurodac, and for our listeners, Eurodac is a database for collecting data on migrants entering the EU, and it's been actually active for many years. But the problem is that because of the limited transparency with these EU agencies that are managing the database and managing border control, we don't know if anything is being added to the database, any profiling, any categorization or labeling, because how do you cross-check something without labels? And how are you labeling the migrants that you are collecting data from at borders? So this is a question that unfortunately we don't always have access to, whether as researchers, journalists, any actor is, I think this community now is struggling to have access to that information. But all of these cases are actually very common, especially in the past few years. How difficult is it to detect these? How difficult is it to spot these cases, especially with the problem of limited transparency? Do you think collaboration has been helping, or do you think it's just as difficult alone as an actor as it is as a community to detect and identify these breaches and these surveillance cases?
Yeah, I think it's hard, but not just because we're talking about tech and data collection that per se seems like ethereal as a thing. It's difficult because of the context in which we are operating. Migration, administration, welfare provision, it's per se an opaque context.
Yeah.
It's take away the new tech layer of things. It's always been a tool of control, a tool of management and oppression. So this is the context in which the surveillance is applied. So add something that strips even more away accountability and responsibility from those in power. And yes, it makes it more difficult. So it's also because sometimes it's we are talking about a context in which people are experiencing various levels of injustice. So sometimes it's hard to pinpoint where this injustice is tech facilitated, where exactly it is tech facilitated.
Because you need to hold both accountable, both the humans behind the operations and the technology as well.
Yeah, because it's hard, also the example you brought, Eurodac. Eurodac is this database, as you said, where if you are applying for asylum, your information is going to go. True, it's hard to know exactly where the information is, but we all know already that the amount of information it asks is problematic. This is as civil society, as digital rights and migrant rights organizations, we have been fighting against the expansion of this database for a long time now. And our answers went unmet, our recommendations went unrecognized. And so it's not just a problem of transparency. We do know that, for example, personal information about children are also taken, which is in total contrast of GDPR and data protection and many other type of categories of information, biometric. There has been an expansion of information that we are aware of. This is law. This is written in European law. We know that this is happening. Even if we know it, this does not help us at this point. Just staying on the knowledge level, it's not enough to make this machine stop.
And speaking of the people affected by Eurodac or other approaches of data collection, from the perspective of the people on the move, because I myself have done research on this, particularly in the Mediterranean region, and I know that two key issues are, obviously the digital literacy, because not everyone can be aware whether or not like their data is being collected sometimes, because when we're talking aerial surveillance, so facial recognition, they have information that they can cross-check with facial recognition systems, but you're not even aware because the drone is right on top of you, and at some point drones are capable of getting the footage from a very significant distance without having being seen. But also we talked about child rights, we talked about consent, we talked about asylum seekers. So the other issue is also having this exposure as someone who's supposedly seeking asylum, but instead is being subject to further let's say, rights violations. So also from the people's perspective, from everyone on the move, whether at sea or on land, how do they cope, and what are the most dire consequences that have been? Because, sometimes we talk about, and I've actually got this new methodology from a guest. Sometimes we talk a lot about risk, but we need to also talk about consequences, because consequences are more valid and we have proof of it, and human lives have been affected. So what are the most dire consequences that we can see in here?
What I can refer to is, however, the work of colleagues, partners that are either experiencing firsthand the border violence, or that work closely with people affected. So for example, one of Protect Not Surveil partner is this network of grassroots organizations, which is called Border Violence Monitoring Network. They do operate mainly in the Balkan region, and they do monitor cases of border violence. And in the past years, they have developed methodology on how to classify tech-facilitated forms of border violence, or of how tech is involved in forced disappearances, for example.
Yeah.
So pushbacks in the Balkans, in Greece, what is the role of tech in that? What is the role of, how can we say that the use of a specific drone was played, and who was behind it played a big responsibility in making a person or a group disappearing. And then we have, so this is one of I would redirect whoever is listening to the work of them. And then I would redirect them also to the work of the migrant-led groups and racial justice groups that are tracking, documenting, but calling out, denouncing the everyday violence that migrant people experience, and how the tech layer adds this extra form of injustice. And the other co-leader of Protect Not Surveil, together with Access Now and EDRI, European Digital Rights, is this group which is called Equinox Initiative for Racial Justice. They're a racial justice group, and they formed this migrant justice community of practice together with two other NGOs that brings together migrant-led organizations. And that's the right place where to go and ask what it actually brings to people in their own experience.
Okay, and I think going back to the people, many people, whether or not they themselves are migrants or not, they sometimes still have this image of tech borders being only physical, and even when physical, like I said, sometimes they're not identifiable. So for the example you mentioned with the mobile phones that collect biometric data, I myself wouldn't be identifying it from the first time I see it, for instance. So this is really hard sometimes to really see the digital dimension of border control and pushbacks, and it's becoming more difficult. So when we try to visualize it, we try to see how it's becoming normalized in today's era, because everyone says, oh, technology, innovation, it's the key to everything, but as long as it's being used and applied responsibly and ethically. So as an extension of technology, particularly with AI, for example, do you see AI as also another layer, or is it part of the process when it comes to tech borders?
Both. It's another layer, and it's part of the process. And I think the figure that you use, it's good. The fact that borders sometimes are just perceived as a material thing is a limit to understand how much surveillance technology plays a role into making borders more violent, because borders are not just defenses. Borders are whatever barriers to freedom and individual agency. So It could be a fence, it could be a visa process, it could be welfare allocation, or sitting in detention in a detention center in Italy. Yes, AI. What is AI? I mean, AI. If we are talking about the automation of processes, the capacity of processing large amount of data quicker and faster, the capacity of conducting automated profiling or predictions. Yes, it's what is making the European policies even more harsher.
Yeah.
Because it's just expanding the scale of this violent machine. Meaning the past 30 years have all been about, migration policies are part of surveillance capitalism. It's part of how every aspect of our life is stripping every one of us of our privacy. Which, what does it mean at the end? It means that when we speak about data, it's just not like our name and address. It's like the way we define ourselves.
Identity.
It's our identity. It's like my country of origin speaks about my history. My migration journey speaks about my struggles.
Yes.
And my fingerprint is my body. It's me. And so the past 30 years have all been about making it normal to take away these qualifiers from people. Now it's the time for making this information even more accessible and usable. So what is AI making? What is AI bringing? AI is making it easier for a random police officer walking down the street to identify you. It's making it easier for big data analytics companies such as Palantir to sell to the city a predictive analytics tool that can tell you what are the most risky places, so you can deploy more police forces there. Yeah. So yes, AI is is the economic dimension of this surveillance infrastructure.
It's both scale and capitalization of these tech border approaches. And I'm actually glad you mentioned big data analytics and tech companies, because they are an actor after all. So when we do talk about actors, who do you think are the key actors involved in applying these technologies? And who are the key actors that are supposedly responsible for governing it and making sure that they are aligned with, privacy laws in EU or beyond EU, with governance frameworks, etc.? Because there's, different roles: the people that are applying it, the developers, and then people working on policy and governance, right?
Yes. And that's also another very hard question. And going back to your question before, how hard it is to detect, this is even harder, because how interconnected is the behind the scene is interconnected and non-transparent, opaque. It's really hard to pinpoint who is what and who's responsible. And maybe there is not even it's not one single responsible. Again, I think we need to step back, and we are looking at what are the actors that are implementing a specific vision of society. At one point before, you said migration is treated as a security issue, not just like the migration and justice issue. And I think this is a key point, that when we talk about migration, we forget to mention. It is something that's been created. And so if we want to look at the industry, if we want to look at the money, if we want to look at who's behind it, we need to look who's profiting from this security-based vision of society. Who's profiting from thinking that, from mongering fear, for creating this atmosphere of fear, and is making money from this solution. Yeah. You should not look at who's advocating for a society that is based on care and protection and would approach migration differently. So look at, if we put these lenses on, who do we have? We have those who provide physically the answers and the tools, and it's a vast market. It's very different type of industries. You have, to make it simple, I would break it down in three categories, but it's not comprehensive, sufficient at all. But just to make it simple for us now, I would look at the big tech. And when I'm saying big tech, I'm talking about, yes, the big companies, but also the cloud software, whoever has the capacity to build the infrastructure that hosts
large amounts of data.
Large amount of data, and this type of infrastructure to make our society work. So the big tech, the data analytics companies, so who not only who builds the infrastructure, but who manages and allows and makes sure that you can have this running and make it like running smoothly. And I've been mapping these companies for a while now, and I'll tell you, it's not only like the big ones that you always hear about. It's also small type of companies that were like small data analytics startups that then saw a big opportunity into going into the security market because that's where the money is going.
Yeah, especially in the past few years. I mean, that's the shame of it all.
Exactly.
We're capitalizing over these issues.
Exactly, which is why I started with like, let's look what the lenses are. And then the third category is the military security industries. So the rifles company, the drones company, all the companies also that maybe had a history of being like defense companies, but then the European context had to rebrand themselves after the 90s and 2000s because Europe was not at war, so had to rebrand themselves a bit. So I will look at these three as the ones offering the products, and then in this specific context of the migration policies, you have those pitching the product, you have those making it like normalizing it. So for me, the three there are many, but like I would look at Frontex, Europol, and EU-LISA as the three main agencies, European agencies that welcome this type of pitching, that create space for them. Frontex is the border guard context, Europol police operations, and EU-LISA is this agency that maintains and builds the large-scale IT systems.
And at some point, I think they also renew the contracts with the same companies over and over again.
I mean,
it's like an agreement, a long-term agreement.
I mean, all the procurement part is all another chapter of like who's actually purchasing what and from whom.
For how long.
But like, if you ask me to pinpoint the actors, I would say these type of companies, these type of agencies to offer the space. But then you need those who legalize it, and they're DG Home,
policymakers. Yeah.
Like in the European Commission, you have DG Home, which is the Direct General for Home Affairs and Migration. That is both about migration, law enforcement, security, just everything in the same bucket. And then you have like governments that are
all of them are involved.
All of them are involved, and all of them are like contributing at reinforcing this idea that we live in a security surveillance-based society, and these are the answers.
But that's the thing, you see, it's both shocking but not surprising that all of these actors are involved. At the same time, a lot of people refer to the EU as an example, you know, as a good example of like, you know, so many governance frameworks for use of and development of AI, for data protection and everything. And it's, like I said, shocking but not surprising. And it's hard to, like, when you're doing the mapping of these actors, you are supposedly trusting these actors with your data, whether they're a citizen or a migrant or asylum seeker, which makes it much more difficult to hold people accountable or even to just provide recommendations. Like you said, you've been trying to provide recommendations to alter the course of governing the use of tech in migration contexts, because it's just as important to protect data of migrants as it is of EU citizens. It's all data and it's all human lives that are being affected. And this leads me to the part about, you know, policy making and governance, and which is one of the key things that are contributing to shaping the path of tech borders. So I know the EU has been quite famous for, you know, the GDPR, for the General Data Protection Regulation framework, and the EU AI Act that's been officially in place and issued in 2025. So these are supposedly two big examples, right? That a lot of people in the world look up to. But do you see any gaps and loopholes in these policy frameworks that you think should be at any point now tackled and addressed?
Yeah, I think first thing to be addressed is the big lie that like Europe is like a gold standard setter. I mean, sure. I mean, now with the erosion of the human rights framework, multilateralism and everything, we cannot say we have not had big milestones from a legal perspective, but it's always been a double standard. It's always been based on the premises and the colonial history of the European Union. And so it has always worked on the assumption that, yes, it was setting standards, while also normalizing the fact that these standards and rights just do not apply to certain categories of people. So the first thing is to acknowledge that this has always been the case. And this is the foundations on which the EU is founded, and that's where if we want to rebuild, we need to start from the foundations. And if you look at the GDPR, yes, I mean, like, true, like, it steered the conversations and everything. At the same time, the same legislative bodies, the European Union, put out pieces of legislation that would just disregard these data protection principles when it comes to the migration context. So you have, like, all these databases that we have mentioned are based on regulations. The interoperability and the exchange of data are based on pieces of policies and laws that allow for whatever, like, it would not be allowed for in the GDPR. For example, consent. There is no consent when you are, like, a migrant person. Like, nobody's going to ask you if you could give consent. If you do not give consent, you will be put in detention and then deported and beaten, whatever. So there is just coercion. There is no consent. Personal data, biometric data, all of these things have never counted in this context. So this has always been the reality, which has then been reconfirmed over and over. We, as Protect Not Surveil, as a coalition, started working together in the context of the AI Act negotiations, also because it was like a timing where there were all this conversation about making the standards on AI regulation. And some of us had been working on the use of tech in migration for many years. For many years. It was not new. And there was the need to come together and be like, either this regulation looks at what is real, or it will not serve the purpose of protecting fundamental rights. So we ended up with the another legislation which is portrayed as like a standard, but that is full of loopholes when it comes to the use of AI by police and migration authorities. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people do not understand why you need to focus at the margins. Like, why you need, what is the point? Why do you need to make sure that everyone is protected, like 1 or 0? Because, like, whenever you have, like, a glitch into the protection system, it will hunt you. It will not stop to the people that you don't care about. It will come to you. So what do we have now? And the European Union is, like, from a policy perspective, is experiencing this very interesting phenomenon, which is the unweaving of the legislations, the laws, the policy that it had built over the past years. 2026, January, the European Union is implementing these omnibus approaches where it is undoing the legislations that had been building in the past. Mm-hmm. And the AI Act has not been fully implemented yet. That is, the European Commission is already saying, hold on a second, actually. Maybe this is too much. Maybe we could carve out some extra exemptions. And these exemptions build on the existing exemptions that were granted already to law enforcement and migration authorities and national security authorities in the first place in the AI Act. Same goes with GDPR. Yeah. GDPR is also under threat. And all of these exemptions and undoing of EU laws that we will see have also to do with the fact that we did not succeed into guaranteeing that the rights were for all in the past decades of European EU policymaking.
It wasn't done on right basis.
It never was. It never was. For sure. There was a lot of, like, good intention, but it never was.
Okay, so, and that is actually a sign that it requires a lot more work, a lot more reforms possibly. And this is the part where I want to know what have you been, like, trying or to contribute to in this regard with Protect Not Surveil Coalition and other initiatives, because I really, really want to inspire our listeners to, you know, see that, okay, it is difficult, but it doesn't mean that there's nothing that can be done about it, you know? So, yeah.
Yes, so Protect Not Surveil is both a coalition and a campaign that brings together digital rights, migrants' rights, racial justice organizations. What we are doing is looking at the intersection of migration and digital policy, but with the lenses of not just, like, trying to fix these bad laws that are coming up.
Okay.
but really trying to stop them and advance some other ideas of how things could be otherwise. So, for example, we have been working on a number of new laws that reinforces and strengthen the European surveillance infrastructure. For example, there have been a number of a new law that empowers Europol with more surveillance capabilities, which was a law that was proposed in the framework of combating human trafficking, but in fact was actually giving police more powers just to surveil migrants and solidarity groups. We are working on the new deportation law that the European Commission is trying to pass. It's called Return Regulation. It's about how to speed up deportation and make them more efficient. And it's vastly is about also surveillance tech and exchange of data. We've been looking at the new migration pact and how it inserts a number of different type of surveillance technology and automation of processes. So we, as a coalition, we are trying to, raise awareness, map all of these manifestations, but also, and mostly because we are also co-led by racial justice groups. We are not just stopping at trying to reform these laws, but really having policymakers taking the responsibility of stopping what is just unlawful and discriminate. For example, now there is this deportation regulation that is being discussed. We as a coalition, but also together with other groups, are calling for a full rejection of this law, because sometimes the risk, especially that comes when you work in silo, like from a digital rights perspective, is that you will limit your recommendations on how to make this privacy respecting, or how to mitigate the data protection breaches.
Yeah.
This is not the point. This is about stopping a deeply racist and violent policy program. So the work we are doing with the coalition is trying to give a more broad view on what it means, the marriage between security, migration, and tech, and how it displays into the making of policies and law. Okay. So we are focusing at a very policy level, but just because when you make policy, you create norms that make things normal and okay. So that's why we, as a coalition, are keeping it at this level, but we are also trying to connect with groups that operate on the ground. So we're trying to make all of this conversation as most accessible as possible, because as you said at the beginning, it's hard for people to really know what the impact is on them. And this is a big obstacle. Okay. These are some of the things we're doing as a coalition in this context.
And like you said, you have to approach this from sometimes 1 or 0, very binary, because if any resolution or law is passed, it's going to have a very long-lasting impact. And we're seeing this with the databases that have been here for many years. We've seen this also with the recent case of data exchange between Frontex and Europol. So we have proof today of the consequences of long-lasting laws and policies before that have put more risk to the data of migrants, and we don't want to do that again. So it's really good to have the position of a yes or no sometimes. And I also know that you're definitely trying to approach this directly with the people at the parliament and the people that are working or have the authority to vote and to have a say in this. But I'm just curious, actually, I want to know if you have also had the opportunity to have this exchange with people working in the tech industry, for example. So
I have to say that personally, my focus has been so far mostly at the policy level. But that's true. I mean, Access Now, historically has been has a communication channel with the tech community. But I think that definitely the tech community, there is more work to be done to connect. We need to go back to an Arendt concept of banality of evil and open a conversation about how investing work on something that might seem innocent is actually contributing to these structures of violence. So that's definitely a strand of work that needs to be reinforced.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having the conversation with people in the tech industry is just as important. But because of the urgency of the situation, I also understand the position of tackling policy first, because the policymakers are the ones that will allow the tech industry procurement processes, they will allow the tech applications, everything will be allowed then. So it's one step at a time, and I'm also seeing a lot of positive uses of technology for the documentation purposes, for mapping, for help hotlines for people that are not sure whether or not their data has been breached. And I really appreciate all of these efforts from both Access Now and Protect Not Surveil Coalition. All of these are like both, resistance, raising awareness methods. And all of them are trying also to make change. They're not just about passively raising awareness, but also contributing to evident and tangible change in policy. But if you would today, like now in 2026, what would you recommend as the most time efficient, I would say, for resistance? Because, with automation, you've said it yourself, with AI, the scale is bigger. We're trying to catch up. We're trying to keep up with the scale of innovation that is being applied in migration contexts. So what do you really recommend for the community to keep up?
It really depends where you're standing. I think these are political times that call for a collective strategy, but also like a clear vision of what is the society we want to live in. And it really depends who you are and what is your skills, what are your skills, what you're bringing to the fight. And then it can really, it really depends on your position. So, but I think the first point is like clarifying that we want to live in a different type of society that is based on protection, care, and not surveillance. So are you a student, a research university student in tech, and your university is engaging on, I don't know, defense program? Do not engage with that and engage on something else. Do you work on policy? Hold tight for the next few European policy. Do not make compromises where you cannot make compromises. Call for rejection. Be brave. Be bold. There is no harm in just saying, using your advocacy avenues to just say that when something is wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah.
If you are, it really depends. Like if you are a startup, do not engage. Do not offer your products to Frontex. If you are a big NGO, give space to those who are representing communities. It's the time also in the civil society space to reconsider like our dynamics of power. So again, I know we are talking about surveillance tech and migration, but like there are like many different steps that can be taken in order to walk towards the same direction. And it's also means rethinking what positions we are occupying into this collective action.
Rethinking, exactly. There's a whole self-reflection process in everything, and all of the actors that you've just mentioned in your recommendation, because we have to take a step back, think about the consequence of the policy, of the tech solution, of the product that we're providing. Maybe ask ourselves, where is it going to be used? How do we ensure that it's going to be ethically used or not? So
and
a
really
lot of questions.
Question like what is ethical is like it's really like there is no time left. So it's really, these are very violent times. So it's not time anymore to think that there can be some safeguards that can mitigate the harm. This is a violent infrastructure. So we just need to start thinking how to build that otherwise.
And the sooner the better.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Caterina. This has been so great. Lovely to always have the conversation with you. And appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our listeners for joining and tuning in to Security Unwired, where we address tech with intent and peace with purpose.